All right, so I'm here in, how do you pronounce this part of Florida?
Well, I live out in the country, so this really doesn't have any name here, but we're close to a small town of Umatilla, which is outside of Eustis, kind of halfway between Orlando and Ocala.
All right, so, all right, guys, sorry about the weird introduction, but this is another episode of A Taboo Life, and I want to thank you guys again for listening. I have a really great guest today. I'm really excited about coming to his house here. I'm gonna have him introduce himself, and then I'm gonna tell you why I'm interested in talking to him. So, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Lukas, spelled with K, Novotny, Novotny. I was born in Czechoslovakia, former Czechoslovakia, now Czech Republic, back in 1961. I immigrated to United States in 1982 via Greece, where I stayed in a refugee camp, came to the States in 1983. Been here ever since, naturalized, moved around a little bit, starting in California, through Ohio, North Carolina, into Florida. Trained as an artist, studied at the University of Applied Arts. That's how I initially made the living, actually, in fact, here in America. Later on, I got disenchanted with the modern art world, which is full of confusion, and we can cover that later.
It's like, why?
Yeah.
Why is a banana on a wall?
Especially the conception, yeah, exactly.
Why is a banana on a wall?
Yeah, exactly. If I can't make out what it is, why am I supposed, So anyway, I'm supposed to believe whatever somebody writes about it. And so I got into archery because I could still be an artist in a certain sense. It's an instrument nonetheless. You can make it pleasing, and the sort of the topical treatment of the archery equipment, can be very artistic, and you cannot really fool anybody with a bad bow. If it doesn't shoot well, then obviously, and it's like the banana, taped to the wall thing. Okay, so I got into archery, and eventually I got into horseback archery as well, and I competed around the world, not just in horseback archery, ground archery as well. I taught horseback archery around the world, and so that's where I'm actually now, although kind of in a process of actually retiring from active competing in horseback archery, picking up some painting lately again, sort of that artist in me is coming out again, but doing it on my own terms, not having to worry about selling it in a gallery. And so still relying on the bows as the primary source of income and livelihood, which I still love making bows. So
I'm excited.
So that's basically the history of.
Yeah, I'm excited about taking a look at your bows because I was looking on your website.
Yeah,
they're beautiful bows, and I brought my bow to show Lukas today too. So he's probably going to think this is pretty cheap, but
no, it's okay.
The reason why I'm excited about actually interviewing you because since I've been wanting to get into archery for a long time, and the last part of last year, I finally got into. I decided to go train in Mongolian archery. I've been training myself, and your video from, I guess, CNN did a video on
their channel.
I was watching it. I was like, man, this is amazing.
Yeah.
So he does horseback archery.
Yeah.
And why don't you explain what is that?
Okay, it's basically archery combined with horseback riding, simply put. It's an ancient martial arts discipline. They used to call it a queen of martial arts. In fact, for example, in Japan, before the peaceful period of when the shogunates were actually being united, starting under Hideyoshi. Before that, prior to that, it was called the way of the bow. So the primary weapon of a samurai was actually bow and arrow.
Really?
Was not really the sword at all.
Why?
Sword was a sidearm. Yes.
It was a backup weapon. Because I know
it was a backup weapon.
I remember reading about history that the katana was a backup weapon, but the primary weapon was the long staff, right?
No, it was actually bow and arrow. That's how they rode out and fought. All the rest. Of course, they were trained in using the katana. They were trained to use the spear. I forget the names of those things. They all have particular names. But anyway, and then of course everybody's aware of Genghis Khan, right? Or Genghis Khan, Mongol warlord from the 1200s, who united the Mongolian tribes and conquered basically it was probably the largest empire ever. Not even a Rome could basically rival it, because it was from China all the way to Europe. And in fact, they've managed to go all the way to the gates of Vienna through the Balkans, but because of the death of Ogadei Khan, they had to return back to Mongolia for Kurultai, which is the election of the Khan, and so the conquest of Europe basically stopped right there. So that's what saved Europe from the Mongol hordes. But it was and then what's amazing about horseback archery, because of the tactics that they used, and a bow and arrow is a sort of a primary weapon. It was kind of a blitzkrieg. So then we go into World War II, and even prior to that, the tactics of Genghis Khan were studied, obviously.
Yeah.
In military academies for the longest time, and till today, they're studied.
Yeah, I remember. There's this podcast called Hardcore History, and it's by this guy named Dan Carlin, and he did an entire series called The Wrath of the Khans. It's a 5 episodes. Each episode's like 4 or 5 hours, just studying the Khans. Right, it's just amazing how. Yeah. What happened in that small period of time.
Exactly. I read a lot of these books. There are wonderful books out there on the subject. It's very intriguing to sort of see. Most of us think about Genghis Khan, and he was a basically illiterate man, but extremely intelligent, because he was able to unite the tribes, create a language for the Mongols, using other people and other people's cultures to advance his ideas and his empire. Pony Express, paper money, all these things opened the roots. Basically, Renaissance happened because of Genghis Khan.
Yeah, the Silk Road, right?
The Silk Road, yeah. He opened it up, made it safe. Not that it wasn't there before. Okay, it was, but there was already trading going on. But he made it really safe.
Yeah, because it said that a woman could walk from one end of the Silk Road to the other, and so nothing would happen to her while he was around.
Exactly. Yeah. So he brought lots of good things into the world, and basically kind of the civilization surged forward because of that. Yeah, there was a lot of bad things that they did, but who didn't?
He was genocidal.
Those were different times. We look at it as, these people are so cruel. Well, we don't have to look that far into the history to find that we're all capable under the right circumstances to do very bad things. Okay, we can. We're certainly capable of that. So
anyway. Was that phrase the line between good and evil runs through every person's heart?
Yeah, that's it. That's just the nature of a man. We're not perfect.
So, Mongolian horseback archery, how did you get into it?
Well, okay, that's long story short. When I was growing up as a child, back in Czech Republic, there was a series by a German author whose name was Karl May, and he wrote this series on this Indian chief whose name was Winnetou. He was an Apache. It was a made-up story, but never mind. And his friend, who was called the nickname that was given by the Indians, Old Shatterhand. He had such a hard punch that he could knock a person out with one blow. Okay, so he was originally, I think, German or something like that, and so these two became friends, and the whole story is built around that friendship. Okay, and they made movies. I think it was like back in late 60s, early 70s, and I read all the books, and so every child in Europe, actually, they're crazy about the Indian and cowboy stuff. Okay, so of course I was playing the Indian cowboy stuff, and that's probably how initially this interest started, by reading and getting to know especially the Plains Indian culture. Because since I was a child, I loved horses. I was a small kid. The very first thing that I ever drew, okay, I no longer have that drawing. I have some very, very old drawings from when I was a child. But my grandmother told me, before she passed, that I drew a horse and a turtle. Okay, and I was apparently 2 or 3 years old. Okay, so I can't vouch for that, but that's what my grandma said. Okay, anyway, I obviously exhibited like artistic abilities from early age. That's why I ended up, at an art school later on in my life, going through adolescence. And so that was the seed. Okay. Of course, growing up under communism, I had a wonderful childhood, even though that I grew up under communism, because as a child, you don't really recognize, if you have nothing to compare it to, you do not recognize things, as being necessarily bad. Obviously, as I grew older and I saw how the society was structured and how things work, that's a different story. But being a child, you don't worry about these things. I ran outside with other kids. We played war, Indians, cowboys, Three Musketeers, whatnot. We made our weapons. We didn't have cell phones to stare into. And so there was a kind of a childhood that I had. And that kind of stayed with me. I went through the schooling. I went to the middle school, arts and crafts school. It was specifically oriented towards glass because I come from a particular part of the country that it's steeped in the history in glass making, going back to medieval times. Yeah. And part of my family was involved in it in one way or another. And so I kind of naturally took that route. And so, you got 15, 16, your interests kind of change. You're looking at girls and, the normal stuff the boys do, right? And then I applied to go to the University of Applied Arts in Prague, this famous school where this very famous professor taught, very well recognized even in this country, if you know anything about modern glass, especially. His name was Stanislav Libensky, and I studied under him. But I did not finish the studies. This was in 1982. Well, I went to school in 1980. I didn't get in the first time because going back to the political regime there. My parents were never members of the Communist Party. So although I found out later I had the best talent exam that year, I was right at the top, which should get me into the school, right? Well, that wasn't good enough because my parents were not members of the party. Instead, the two girls got in who couldn't draw a straight line, but their parents were high up in the Communist Party. Yeah. Okay. So we actually had to use bribery because this kind of system breeds corruption. Give a fat envelope to a minister of culture who then signed up the paper to get me in. Okay. And that was only because we had some connection through somebody else, in between person, and go in between person. Anyway, so that's how I got into the school, basically through corruption.
Hey.
I didn't have to do that because my talent exam was the best, but that didn't matter. So never finished the school and then came to the States. We had to go to the refugee camp, which that alone is a long story. It was pretty tough. That made me grow up, actually, because I was 21 at the time. And I got to the States, the archery was kind of on a back burner. You're trying to get established. I didn't speak any English. It was my father and I who came here first. And then it took another 5 years to get my mother out of Czechoslovakia. Wow. Because they signed the Helsinki Agreement. It was in regards to human rights in 1970s. I forget when, 77, I believe it was. But the communists never really held on to anything they signed, just like Hitler didn't. Yeah. So, and the American government was telling us, look, we can't really do anything unless your government wants something from us like technology, then we can bargain with them. And that's eventually how we got my mother. Okay, sidetrack here, because we're talking about archery at the moment.
No, this is pretty interesting, so keep going.
Yeah, so I'm in this situation, basically learning English, getting to know the culture. It was very difficult, trying times. We had a Catholic charity that took care of us, actually, initially when we came here, which was wonderful because they were extremely helpful in teaching us English, teaching us how to write a resume, helping us find a job. And they did a tremendous job doing that, for the refugees. Because, on the papers when you're applying to immigrate to the United States, they ask you what religion you are. Not that we were practicing Catholics, really. Yeah. I was baptized as a Roman Catholic, so was my dad, basically. So I didn't appreciate it so much then as I do now, basically, to see what the church really done for us. But anyway, So going through these to basically establishing oneself in the country, getting job, learning English. It wasn't until one day later on, like maybe I would say a couple of years later, we moved from Southern California to the Bay Area in Northern California, and we're driving on this road, and then there's like big sign archery shop. And it kind of like sparked something. Okay?
Yeah.
So I said, Dad, pull over, My dad was driving. And so we go in there, and this was in the early 80s, so the compounds were just becoming prominent. Okay, so I saw the wall of compounds, right? And I'm looking for a bow. Well, I knew they were bows, but it's like, they look weird, man. What is this? But in a corner there of the shop, there was a section of the traditional archery tack, right? And it was mostly what he had there were Martin archery product, like ML10 longbow or the Howitt recurve. I don't know if you're familiar with these. These are from the old days, Martin archery. And I went to that section. I started looking at it, and I just about asked the guy, to hand me one of these bows over so I can look at it, maybe try it out on a range. They had an indoor range. But I said, what do you want this for? This is old S-H-I-T. You don't want that?
No, you could curse him.
Yeah. No, you got to get one of these modern things. So my dad talked me into buying my first compound.
Yeah.
Okay. And it was a Martin Lynx, 25% let off, today. It's like today they have 85% let off. So I brought that home and I started shooting, and I got really bored and tired because after about a month I could shoot like lemons off of a lemon tree that we had in the yard, in the neighborhood. And I said, it's not really archery, So I went and I saved money, and I secretly bought me the longbow, the ML10 longbow. Kicked like a mule, doggone thing will take your arm off. But I became, it was a challenge, but I liked the challenge. So. And that's how I started, okay? And I went hunting like in Nevada with my buddy from work, and then on that one particular hunt I realized how handicapped I felt with a compound bow, because I had opportunities where I would just walk onto the buck in a bed, and I startled him, and he would get up looking at me for like maybe 3 seconds. And before I actually went and looked through the peep sight onto my pin sight up front on a compound bow, because it wasn't instinctive shooting, the damn thing was gone. If I had a longbow, I would just, he'd be dead. He was from here to the door. And so I said, no. That day, I put that compound down. Now, I'm not saying that there's not anything wrong with a compound bow, okay? If the guys love it, great, because I'd rather see guys shooting accurately instead of running around maiming animals because they don't know how to use traditional equipment.
Yeah, just kill the animal quickly.
Exactly. So, but to me, that's not really archery. I call it training wheels. And somebody listening to it may get insulted by that. I apologize.
No, I get it, because like the range I have a membership to, they want me to buy a compound bow because they see me with a horse bow and they like it. But it's like, no, you used to buy a compound bow. So I shot one of the compound bows they had at it. I didn't like it because it was too easy.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't challenging.
Yeah, I tried it like after a long time, something like a year ago. It was just felt so weird. I don't know. There's something about it. It's a tool. It's a machine. It's 40 moving parts, and some of these like really top-notch compounds is just too complex. Anyway, back to that. So and then I got married the first time, and I'm married second time now to my present wife, and I moved to Ohio.
Yeah.
Outside of Toledo, in the small town of Grand Rapids, and we had a farm there because my wife then was established fairly well in glass blowing circles, like as an artist, basically independent, and studied with a man named Labino, who was like Dominic Labino was like the sort of the godfather of the modern art glass movement in America. So she studied with him. And she kind of inherited his studio and the property. So that's what I came into. And that's at the time I was still making glasses. I was making a living. Glass sculpture, okay? Not some knickknacks that you see over there at St. Augustine. No. It was like, I was published. I was part of shows in Chicago, in places like that, in art galleries and even internationally. So it wasn't like I was a complete unknown. And I did a lot of corporate stuff, commissions and stuff. But that archery was there, that little flame was still in there, right? And as the time went on, I don't know, I got disenchanted with the modern art world. I always felt like when I did a sculpture, I was like selling my own kids, How do you sell your own kids, And I saw there were so many, bullshitters out there, if I have to say it this way. I don't know if it's okay to say.
No, you could curse. No, it's like
no, I'm not gonna curse like really badly, but this is the good word to put it, right?
Yeah, it's like
in modern art, this conceptual art. Somebody piles the sand in the middle of the room, and they write 10 pages about it, what it means, and then you're supposed to like swallow it up, hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, it's like what we talked about earlier about the banana on the wall.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
happened a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, and somebody pays $50,000 for it. I mean,
No, I think it was in the millions.
Yeah, okay, it's crazy. This is what that's a complete insanity. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And this is what I was fighting against. And the politics of it, and I said enough of it. I can't fool anybody with a bad bow, Mm-hmm. And so because already at that time I got the hands on this book of Jim Ham. He was one of the pioneers of the traditional archery, the going back to the Indians. He's a guy from Texas. I'm sure he's still alive. He wasn't that old. And he wrote this little book on Native American bows. I'm sure you can still probably look it up someplace. And I studied it. I read it 10 times over, and I cut the wood down in the woods. We had 80 acres, so there was plenty of woods on the property. And then I had to wait to season it, and it's like impatience.
You guys season the bow?
Oh, you got to season the wood before you can make the. You can't. You cut it green, the wood. You cut it at a certain time of the year, and then you have to season it.
What do you mean by season?
Season, you have to air dry it.
Oh, okay.
It has to sit air drying basically until the moisture basically dissipates from the wood. So it's not a 30% moisture content, but rather down to 10-12% is when you can actually make a bow out of it. Okay. Otherwise, if it's green, you're gonna string it and you're gonna shoot it and it's gonna stay bent. It'll take set, what's called a set. And so, that's how I started. Just as a hobby, just tinkering around. Of course, pile of broken kindling and stuff was usable for our wood stove. So, and then I got to know Dean Torges from Southern Ohio, Ostrander, Ohio, outside of Columbus. This man became like the figure in traditional hunting and self-bow making. Okay. He was a professor, I think, literature professor. He gave that up. He became a cabinet maker, and so that he really was a great craftsman. That was to his credit, because the bow that he made when I first time I met him, they were beautiful self bows made out of Osage orange or other white woods, not just Osage, like oak and even ash and other woods. And so we became friends, and I kind of learned from him a lot. Okay, so my primary focus was the plains bows, the Sioux, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and all that, Comanche, Kiowa. I still have a whole bunch of them in the shop, and so I reproduced a lot of those. And then I realized, well, I grew up in Czechoslovakia, so it was formerly known as Bohemia. It was part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Since the Austrian Habsburgs, they took over in early 1500s, really. After the political turmoil, after the Hussite uprisings in early 1400s, there was a lot of political turmoil, and so the Roman Empire, the Habsburgs, they took advantage of that. The Austrian Empire, they took over Bohemia. We've been under them for 300 years, basically, until 1918, end of the World War I. When we became independent again. Well, never mind. But I always, the stories floating around about the Turks. Because the Turks invaded Europe many times, besieged Vienna several times. And you always heard about these powerful Turkish bows that could penetrate, oak door, and stuff like that. So it's really intrigued me, and I started looking into that. So I remembered as a kid, hearing these stories, or even like fairy tales about the boyars, Russian boyars with their recurved bows, because the Russian boyars, they were influenced by the Mongols, obviously, who always, controlled most of the Russia, really. Later on known as Tatars, or the Tatar Ilkhanate of Crimea. And so, I'd like to reproduce those, but the information was completely lost. We didn't know, how it was made. It was no literature on it, I didn't know a thing about it. I mean, I saw a few pictures from the museums. This was before the internet. And there was this one guy I met in one of these shows, these archery shows up in Michigan that were quite famous and large. And he says, yeah, I know one guy from Wisconsin. His name is Jeff Schmidt. He's a professor of physics and mathematics at the University of Wisconsin. And I'll just, when I get home, I'll call you and I'll give you his phone number. I don't have it with me. So he called me back, sure enough. And so I contacted this man and spent like an hour and a half on the phone with him, picking his brain. He was gracious enough to listen to me, to talk to me. I ended up going over there a couple of times because he was the first man I knew who actually recreated something like this successfully. Because as you know, beautiful things take generations to develop, and it takes only one generation to lose it, that skill. And because the way it was set up, these guilds back in the day, like in Turkey, for example, each family guarded their own secrets. Although Sultan actually commissioned Kani in 1800s to write a treatise or a book on the subject of archery and flight archery, especially on that subject. But however, he was not a bow maker, nor was he an archer.
Yeah.
So a lot of the information written down and then later on translated from the Ottoman language into German. It was originally translated to German first. There's a lot of like discrepancies, like what does this mean, So that was the first book. So the Klapstad guy in Chicago had it translated into English. So this was the first book. I think the first print was in late 1930s. In fact, I have one of the originals from the World War II. The book. Wow. Yeah. You couldn't find it anywhere. Anyway, so that was the first book I read on the subject. But like I said, because it wasn't complete information, a lot of it was probably something that he described, but he didn't really understand. So Jeff actually cleared up a lot of it because he already had the trial and error experience. Okay. So that's how I started. I was still making the the glass. I was still making a living doing that. Was the primary way of doing it. But my ex, she saw what was happening in me, that my heart was no longer in this this art thing, and she said, you should just quit, just start making these bows. So thanks to her, because she still had a business going that brought money, and I was able to go on my own because there was no money. Being a bow maker, there's no money in it.
Yeah.
That's the problem. So you have to build a niche for yourself. And it can take years before you have any reputation, I no longer have to advertise or anything like that at all. I mean, I get orders from all over the world, okay? So, but initially that wasn't the case, obviously, so there was a little, but it was a little better for me because of these horn bows. As I started studying how the horn bow functions, and as I started to gain a little bit of experience making these bows, I started to understand the principles of the working limb in a horn bow that was unknown in a Western recurve, for example. Western recurve at the time, or even today, not so much today anymore because they're starting to understand this principle as well, was basically a tapered limb. And so you bend until it gets broken. It's a tapered limb. Yeah. It's like basically like a longbow is a tapered limb. The D-shaped longbow. That's basically from thick to thin, right? So it bends in an even arc. Well, that was the recurve, except it was curved. Okay. It wasn't until later they started using reversed laminations and stuff. So I started to duplicate these bows in modern materials. Okay, meaning that I would make the static tip recurves, but to make them look like horn bows. Yeah. Okay, and apply my knowledge from building horn bows into these bows. And when people saw the performance, the efficiency, I immediately became known because of it. So it totally set me apart like very quickly. And that's how my career in bow making started. So it didn't really take that long. So I had that niche. I developed that niche. So everybody knows me because of this, you know. And so this is like, wasn't until years later I came into China for the first time to some competition. And I had people like kissing my feet and calling me master. And what the heck is going on here? How did I had no idea that all of a sudden I was considered like to be one of the best bow makers in the world. And I never knew how I got that reputation, you know. And so it was kind of amazing to see that I basically influenced the modern, what you see have in your bow and everything is what I had invented, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. The principles of it. Okay. Of course, I don't get the credit for it so much anymore, but that's okay. I know where it came from, and that's good enough for me.
You know, you brought it back.
Exactly. So, not that I invented anything per se,
but you brought it back into the modern world.
I was inspired by the knowledge of making these horn bows and kind of translated into the modern bow making. And so it was myself and primarily also another friend of mine up here in Georgia. His name is Jaap. He lives up in Odin or whatever the name of it is. Not too far when you get over the border into Georgia there. So that was how I got back into the archery, and I guess the rest is history because I started to officially do business. I had a partner, Tony Horvath was his name, from Michigan, right over the line. It's not too far from, I didn't live too far from Michigan line. He was working for the Ford company as an engineer at the time. Very talented man. We became really good friends, so we kind of did it together to get it off the ground. Obviously, there was not enough money for him to feed his family from this, so we didn't have like a bad party or anything. He just says, look, I can't do this because, there's just no way between my work and this. So we kind of parted company. We're still friends. He's a great guy. Very excellent artist too, painter. And so I've been in it ever since, just alone. I try to have people work for me, but it's very difficult to find honest people. I have to be honest to say it this way. It's difficult to find today people. There is no longer that sense of apprenticeship that we used to have a couple hundred years ago. You teach somebody and they run away with it, and then they say they came up with it, and they don't give you credit, or worse yet, they steal from you your knowledge and your ideas in other ways, or use something that you didn't allow them. So that's one of the reasons I never really made the business big. I keep it exclusive. I'll never become rich, obviously, but that's okay. Because I could have done that 10 times over to hire people and work. Yeah. I'd become a manager then. I wouldn't have any creativity, time for creativity, I should say. So basically, that's kind of the history of it. Back in 1997, 98, around that time is when we went officially into the business. First with Tony, and then a couple of years later, it was just me. So, and I've been doing it ever since. So, yeah.
Yeah. So how do you get into the competition part? Because you actually have a range here on your property.
Yeah. How did I get into competing? Well,
and just to specify, he does actually horse-mounted competitions where he actually rides on a horse and shoots from the back. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah. It's okay. So let me put it. Okay. So when I got married in 1989.
2 years after I was born.
Yeah, I moved to Ohio. Now, I loved, as I said, since I was a child, I loved horses. For me, this animal is magical. Just seeing it move, and it's like, it's incredible just to watch it. So as a kid, I was dreaming, riding horses and stuff, but it was impossible to own a horse in Czechoslovakia. It was communist, it was a bourgeois thing, okay? But then again, if you're a member of the party high up, we call them red aristocracy, That's the problem with the left. They talk about equality, but in the end they become the ones in power, and that's who we call the red aristocracy. And you've got the class below them that's the same way off. It's just all miserable wretches, being ruled by these people. But anyway, so it was impossible. It was kind of like just a dream. So it wasn't until I actually came here that I could realize these things. And that was the beautiful thing about America, that at least back in the 80s, and it's still possible today, I'm sure, that it gave these opportunities that you wouldn't have anywhere else in the world. Yeah, there are many things that are wrong in this country, but at the same time, I couldn't say anything bad, because if you work hard, if you're honest enough, you can get ahead. You cannot say the same thing about other places in the world. You know, it's either due to bureaucracy that's too extensive. I mean, I know because my wife and I looked into certain things like how to do business. Even my former Czechoslovakia now, which is now free basically, or in Portugal, and even Brazil. And it's like when you look into like the sticks they will throw at your feet. As a small business person, it's difficult to get off the ground unless you're a large corporation with a lot of money. It's like, forget it. It's getting harder and harder in this world to live your dream. People are becoming robots, basically. You know, like working in places that are hating their jobs. You know, they cannot really realize their dream. I'm extremely lucky because I'm able to make a living in these surroundings, being my own boss. I'm the lord of my time. So I feel extremely fortunate, you know, being able to do that. Now I got a little sidetracked here. What were we talking about? Come back to.
We're talking about how you got into horseback.
Yeah, that's it. Okay.
No, but it's also coming back what you just said. No, I get what you mean too. Fortunately, I would love to do this for a living, actually go around the world and actually get people's stories. But right now I have to work a normal job.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like the American dream. Like, yeah, you're going to have to sacrifice now to get to the place where you want to be.
Been there, done that. And you're absolutely right, because when I was younger, when I was in my 20s, for me, that was coming back from work, my full-time job, grabbing a dinner, taking a nap, and spending time working in my garage after I bought some equipment one by one for cutting glass and stuff like that until 2, 3 in the morning. Sleeping 3, 4 hours. You know, I couldn't do that today. Do it while you can when you're young. I'm telling you, because it doesn't get any easier. Okay. So you have the right idea. You gotta, you know, if you got a dream, you know, as the saying goes, if your heart is in it, money will follow. And money is not everything either. I mean, you know, of course you want to make a living. You know.
Yeah, of course you want the resources to keep going.
Exactly. So. But I think that if you're passionate about something and if you have the vision, that I think you can get there. I'm the proof of it. I had the vision, I went after it. And I think that a lot of people today, especially young people, lack that vision. They think it's not there. They think that, you know, maybe I'm wrong, but at least from what I see and what I see on the news and how things are and the rates of suicide going up, drug abuse and this, and I think there's a lot of hopelessness.
I agree with you. Because coming from my generation, like you kind of told that, you know, maybe it's best to be rich, that maybe you should just get a good, you know, CEO job, something like that. And now as I got older and the different careers I had, I was a police officer, I worked for Disney, now I work for Tesla. You know, it opens your eyes up. It's like, no, this Joseph Campbell, he's a guy that I love to quote. He studied mythology and he came up with the idea of the monomyth. He said that you should always follow your bliss, and sometimes that may take a while to find. Yeah. But bliss doesn't mean like it's going to be complete happiness. Like you want to suffer through it, but the bliss means that it's worthy to suffer through.
Yeah. That's I concur. Yeah. So anyway, first I had to get a horse, right?
Yeah.
Going back to the horseback archery part. Well, my ex grew up riding horses. She grew up in a well-to-do family, a local family up in Perrysburg, outside of Toledo, which is the area of a lot of wealth in there because there was the Libby Owens Ford, the spark plug, the Champion spark plug, you know, that's the family. And all these people. So she grew up in that environment, so she had access to horses and all this. So I don't know, I think it was like in 1992, 93 when we got, 93 I think it was, when we got the first couple of horses we bought, a couple of Arabian horses. And I didn't know how to ride. I mean, so I was completely self-taught. I ruined one horse entirely, making it hard mouth. The poor mare was so afraid of me because as a man, you know, Why do you think there are not many men riding horses anymore? It used to be totally man thing, right? It's because men like to force their will on the animal.
Yeah.
Okay. And you cannot. Women are much more like, you know, they want to get involved and talk to the animal, and you know, it's like what's more the touchy-feely part.
It's more of a relationship.
So they get more success. Whereas men just, oh, you're gonna do what I want you to. It's just, and so I learned the hard way. With horses, you have to be extremely impatient, and that in turn helped me to actually deal with people. Believe it or not, training horses helped me on lots of things. It was a long, painstaking process, but through that, I also became better with people, I dare to say. Okay? So that, you know, I went a few years going through a few horses, learning how to ride, doing all that stuff, still doing archery separate. And then when finally I was fairly proficient, even bareback riding and stuff, I put the two together. But it wasn't anything serious. It was just kind of like I would get on my horse bareback, pretending I'm an Indian, you know, riding in my field outside of the house, you know, shooting at bales, you know, like it's pretending it's buffalo. I'm hunting buffalo, you know, with the bows that I made, you know. And it was great because I killed a deer with a bow. My first deer I killed was my bow that I made, you know, it was a sinew back shine bow like this short. I came into the shop where you check the deer in the check station. There were a couple of compound bow hunters, you know, there, and they saw the deer that I got. Oh, it's a nice buck, man. What'd you get it with? And I showed them my bow. What did you do? Beat it to death with that stick? I says, no, the arrow went right through the buck. I never found the arrow. And they're like,
I never found the arrow.
They were staring at me like, you know, what planet did you come from? They couldn't believe it that I killed it.
Your ancestors used this.
Yeah, I gave it to a friend of mine. With the mount, my first buck, friend of mine in New York, who just has it hanging in his flat with the bow that I killed it with. Yeah, it was amazing. So that's how I started. Nothing serious, just fun. I never knew there were like even other people doing it. Okay, nobody was doing it except one man in Hungary. His name is Lajos Kashai. You'll find him on the internet if you just punch it in, Lajos Kashai. He's kind of a godfather of the modern horseback archery. Now, I don't agree with him on many things, his philosophy and approach to horseback archery, but he was initially my inspiration, and I admired him greatly for what he has done for the sport. We had our differences later on, but probably still do today, obviously, because of the way we approach the sport a little differently. But he's an amazing man with an amazing skill. You know, by far, in his sport and the type of a track that he practices, that he developed, he's unbeatable till today. Okay. I did beat him twice. One time in a serious competition. I'm the only one in the world who actually did. I'm going to brag because that's something to brag about. And I beat him one time in semifinals, and the only reason I didn't go into the finals is because it was an Al-Faris competition in Jordan. I had to leave. I had to come back home. Okay. There was some church function. I'm a Catholic, so it was installation of a pastor, and he wanted me to altar serve for him. So I said, yeah, I'll be back. Because to me, that was more important than just running around on horses. But anyway, so that's basically how I got into it, is that he came to America. A friend of mine, at the time I didn't know him, but we became good friends. His name is David Gray. He's up in PA outside of Pittsburgh. I think it's called Williamsburg or something. I forget the name of the town he lives in. Anyways, he went on a trip to Europe. And he was in Austria, and somehow he came across somebody or a shop where he saw one of these like bows like you have, you know? And asked the guy, where did this come from? Oh, it's a man in Hungary making this. And I said, I'm not too far from Hungary. I have a rental car. He found out who he was, where he lived in Kaposmeros, south of Budapest there. You know, got his phone number, called him up, can I come? Sure, come on down. He spoke not very good English, but good enough Lajos at the time that he managed to arrange for the meeting, so he went to his valley. And when he saw him doing it, he was so impressed that he thought about it, and it's like, how can we bring this guy into America and like have him put on a show at one of these big shoots that we have up north, like in Michigan.
Yeah.
At the time it was called Longbow Invitationals, you know, and so it wasn't just a 3D shoot and a competition, but also a lot of vendors, you know, coming from all over the country to sell their bows and stuff and arrows. And so he brought him in 1988, he brought him to America. To Berrien Springs in Michigan. And I was there with Tony, the partner I mentioned initially, the man that I did the bows with. We had a booth set up there. And, you know, so I was so excited because I knew that, you know, this was coming in, you know, that we were waiting for them to drive in from Pennsylvania. And they came in, they settled, they got the horses taken care of and everything. They built the course the next morning. The track, you know. I know Lajos had like a few days only with the getting a good horse, because not every horse is going to take up horseback archery. Yeah. It's like people have different talents for different things, or abilities, physical abilities of a sort. You know, not everybody's going to be a power lifter, or not everybody's going to be a, you know, runner or whatever.
Yeah.
So the same with the horses, they have different talents for different things. But anyway, he got this horse trained. And then I saw it and I thought, my gosh, this is incredible. It's like watching a ballet on a horse. This guy's so good, you know, shooting 6 arrows on a 90-meter track, making it look so effortless, you know, and I got really intrigued. So we became friends. I talked to him. And David, when we sat down with Yapko Pedrai, the guy that I mentioned in Georgia here, and his wife, and he says, we should do like a festival, archery festival, and bring this guy over. Maybe we can like have him teach this skill, you know, to us. And they found a place out in Iowa, in the middle of cornfields, Fort Dodge, Iowa. But yeah, it was tucked away in the middle of nowhere, but at least the local community was like willing to put up some money, give us the fairgrounds. We got some sponsors. There was a lady there, a teacher, a local teacher, who was really good at writing grants, you know, and asking for money. So that's where we started. And I was kind of like his right-hand man, because I was probably the most skilled at the time to even like help him out, since I was already practicing a little bit of that horseback archery. And so we became really good friends, and I learned from him. He wasn't a very good teacher. It wasn't just because of his English, but he just wasn't a good teacher. You kind of had to learn from just watching.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing he ever explained to me how to do was how to do back shot, the parting shot, or the Parthian shot.
The back shot is when you actually put the bow behind your back.
No, that's called the Yarmaki shot. Just basically shooting over the rump of the horse, just the regular way.
Okay.
Okay, so, you know, the seat, the position, how you shift your weight and all this stuff. And so those were the beginnings, and that's how I slowly started to develop the skill. We went over to his valley in Hungary, in Kaposmero. He's this incredible training facility that he built. He was lucky because this was at the time when the communism was kind of like falling apart. Well, it wasn't falling apart. It got exported under different names into Western Europe. But the things were changing in those former communist countries. It was becoming more free, at least economically speaking, you know, more capitalist-like. And so he was able to purchase the land. At the time, it was like a Wild West. It was the same in my country. Okay, you could pick up a piece of land for nothing. It was like people's machinations that were half criminal, basically. You know, it was a Wild West. So he came in at the right moment, and because of the cheap labor and everything, he developed the building these bows, and the labor was cheap, and he could sell in the West. So there's money coming in left and right. So he built this incredible facility. Okay, he's got an indoor track covered. Okay, it's over 100 meters long. Okay, to practice horseback archery, you know, in inclement weather. And then he's got an outside course. He's got practice, just ground archery courses. Then he built this like very traditional, like a in this tradition of the old Magyars, when there was the last invasion to that Carpathian Basin. As you know, there were 3 successive ones, from the Huns through Avars to Magyars, and they built in kind of a style of that architecture. It's not that they built something, but it's that particular style, this old Magyar, because Hungarian is actually, it's called Magyar, okay, which is the name of the tribe that came in there. Okay, Magyar. Okay, Magyar. Magyar. Yeah, it's Hungary is I don't know where that came from. It's an English word for it. Ungarisch in German, but it's actually Magyar. And so I went there with 4 other guys: Pat Stoddard, Alex Tiberi, and Todd Dell. Those were the 4 of us. There was another kid, unfortunately, who was very talented, but he quit. Whatever happened to him? You know, you got these people that shoot up like stars, light up really bright, and they just kind of peter out.
Yeah.
And so that was the beginning of the horseback archery. So I came back, and we had some issues. We had a kind of like we drifted apart eventually 3 years later on over certain issues that I don't want to go into. That's besides the point. And I became basically the head instructor in America to do this, to continue it, when he stopped coming here after him. And we founded, with David Gray, we founded the organization called MA3, which is basically to unite the people and put them under one banner, and that it's in existence still today. I led it for many years, but obviously eventually I got tired of it, so I'm no longer involved with it. I'm a life member, but I'm not involved in the politics of it anymore, and the leadership of it. And so, so here we are today, years later, 22 years later, 20. If I count up starting horseback archery about 97. So I just wish I started earlier. You know, I'm 58, and something told me this year that, you know how you get this like intuition of some sort, something like a little bug that gets in your head and says, you know, it's time to quit, you know. It's like, you know. It's not that I wanted to. It was really sad for me to sell my horses. I still have 1 horse left, okay? And I go out there just for my own kicks. But this happened very quickly. This just happened recently. Okay, I sold him 4 weeks ago? Oh. But I kind of knew that this period in my life is over. And I've been always the kind of a guy that if I do something, I just don't beat around the bushes. If I quit, okay, I'm quitting. That's it, you know. I'm not quitting archery, obviously. I still want to compete in ground archery. Because I don't have to worry about falling off and breaking something. Because that's another thing. I don't bounce as well as I used to. And if you're riding horses, you're going to fall off.
Yeah.
And going to these competitions, I've been on some crazy animals. Okay. And it can get dangerous. Nobody's ever got really badly hurt in this sport. This last year, guy in Hungary got pretty mangled. But I had pretty hard falls, and I got to knock it, thanks to God, that I had never really seriously got hurt. Oh, you know, I would get banged up and be sore for a few days, right? But now it's not a few days anymore. It's a week or 2 or a whole month that I'm sore if I fall. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As you kind of go over 45 mark, you know, it's just like you don't recover as well if you go work out. You don't, you know, it's just it's not the same. So I have to live in reality. I have to use good counsel, and I have to be prudent. And since I'm the only one who makes money, my wife helps me in a business, but, you know, if I don't work in that shop, no money's coming in.
Yeah, so you can't afford to get hurt.
Exactly. So that's why I kind of okay, time to leave. And it's better to leave while you're at the top. The last competition, I won.
Yeah.
And I beat somebody I wanted to beat really badly to put him in his place, okay, because he really deserved it. So I achieved what I achieved. I'm the only one who ever beat Kasai once, and I'm proud of that. Nobody else was able to ever beat him. I'm the only one who ever beat him. So I accomplished all these things. I won so many medals and so many things in competitions, and if I didn't place first, I would be second or third. I'm trying to brag. I'm just telling you, yeah, I'm proud of that accomplishment. Why not? You know, I did pretty damn good for myself. So I don't need to prove anything anymore. You know, I used to have a really big ego, I do admit to that, but I've kind of wised up since. I no longer have the dog in this hunt. So I just do a lot of coaching now. I get hired and I go teach people archery and ground archery or horseback archery, you know. And
yeah, because I saw on your website you still teach
classes.
Yeah,
I have people come here for private lessons. So, in fact, I'm going to have somebody come in, and they bring their own horses. This horse that I have is got a kind of a screwy head. He's very good, does horseback archery well, but once in a while something clicks in there, and the screw gets loose, and he does stupid things, and can fall off and get hurt. You know? Oops, I can't put anybody on him. So, okay, so that's that. That's the history of it. Just about. Brought up to date.
Yeah. All right, guys, so we're going to go into our other half of the interview. So for anyone that's new to the interview, or for anyone that's returning listeners, thank you guys for returning. For anyone new to the interview, I asked these specific questions towards the end of the interview. These questions are more like psychological questions. Some of them are fun, some of them are serious, but they're supposed to show a different side of a person. The reason why I ask these questions it's because I interview a lot of people that comes from different paths of life, got different points of view, and these questions are supposed to show a different side to that person, and it's supposed to show empathy too. So the reason for these questions is I want people to connect to the people I'm talking to. So we get started. Given the choice of anyone in the world from any time period, who would you want as a dinner guest and why?
Say that again, phrase it again.
So if you had to choose anyone from any time period, or from any part of the world, from history, from present till the past, who would you want as a dinner guest and why?
Who would I want as a dinner guest? That's a really interesting question. And I don't know if you will guess the answer or not.
Genghis Khan?
No, actually no. You know, I'll tell you what means more to me than anything. I'm a Catholic, I already told you, and a very Orthodox one. I would say it would be Jesus Christ.
Yeah?
But the thing is that I can have him as a meal in his body, blood, soul, and divinity in a Mass.
Yeah.
So if I think about it in those terms, then I would then go back and say, if it was just a regular human being, whom would I have for a dinner guest? Would be Fernando III, King of Castile and Leon. Saint Fernando III. I just read his biography. This is incredible.
I never heard of him.
It's just unbelievable if you read this man's
life.
What's
special to
Well, he conquered basically most of the peninsula in 1200s. Okay, the final conquest didn't happen until the Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile. The combined forces, they basically pushed the final Moors out of the Spanish, out of the peninsula there. But he managed to almost entirely conquer the whole peninsula by himself in the mid 1200s, basically, the reconquest of Spain, and how he did it, and his life and his devotion. He was a very religious man. Well, he was a living saint, basically. It's more than miraculous what he was able to accomplish. So, as a person, as a king, he was a very compassionate king, very just king. He wasn't just some despot, anything like that. Yeah, I mean, I just recently read his book, and I've never read anything like it. Yeah, his contemporary was Saint Louis IX of France. It was another crusading king. A lot of people will probably hear this and say, "Oh, the Crusades." The Crusades. You know, people don't know anything about history and the reality of it. Okay, what actually Crusades were and what happened at that time. And I don't know if you want to get into it.
No,
but there's a lot of misinterpretation, misconception, and outright lies about the history of the Crusades. It was not that the Europeans set out to conquer the territory and kill the Muslims. That wasn't the objective. The objective was to protect a lot of the Christians in the area. You have to realize that that area was actually Christian before the Muslim came.
Yeah,
it was solidly Christian. And it was until the rise of Islam that the Islam actually they came in and conquered the area, did a lot of damage to the local populace and to the Christian faith. And yes, there were things done wrong on both sides, but that's war. And if you look at it from the perspective of the time period, it wasn't anything worse that they would have done then that we do now in some of these wars. And so it was a just war of self-defense, basically. Some of these crusades, not necessarily were they always. There were some people that were motivated by gain, of course, by material gain, but a lot of it was really, truly spiritual. Okay, and they always say, oh, the Muslims, look. They came into the Middle East, they conquered the area, they adopted a lot of the local customs. The trade went on just fine. There might have been a battle over the hill, but the people went on about business. Christians and Muslims trading and living together just fine.
Yeah.
Okay. So, the way it's portrayed today is this war of aggression, these horrible Christians. Everybody likes to hate on the church. But nobody says one thing. We wouldn't have the Western culture if it wasn't for church. We wouldn't have the compassion for each other that we have today, because that's a Christian virtue. The church started hospitals, universities. We wouldn't have the education. It wasn't for the Benedictine monks. We wouldn't have the Europe that you know today. We wouldn't have America that you know today. And that's what people are blind to recognize. But devil seems to hate the church. The true church, which I believe is the Catholic Church, if I have to get into the religion of it. But that's the sad reality of it. And of course, Islam has its good points. They've done lots of good things in science, art, and all this stuff.
Especially math.
Yeah, math. Yeah, astronomy. All this. And so even Fernando III, when he was conquering the peninsula, he always gave an offer to. And Genghis Khan did the same thing. In fact, look, if you surrender to me, you're just going to be my vassal. You can stay a king. You have to pay me a tribute. But I'm not going to screw with your culture.
Yeah, he kept the cultures.
Yeah, but you cannot abuse the Christians. You're going to have to learn to live in peace. And it was the same thing with Genghis Khan. In fact, he had laws against intolerance. You had to get along, Muslims, Christians, and everybody in his kingdom. Now, I'm not saying he was promoting what we call indifferentism, which is like any religion, just as good as any other. Well, that's not true, but nonetheless, look, if you believe in something, the other person may not agree with you, but whether you like it or not, you're going to have to tolerate it somehow.
This is your neighbor. So
yeah, this is your neighbor. Love your neighbor. And that's one of the Christian principles. Love your neighbor as yourself. It doesn't say love your neighbor because he loves you. No, it also goes on and says love your enemy. Okay? That means you wish the best for them. And so people tend to forget their roots of the Western civilization. And so it's always a complex issue, and it's really a touchy issue, especially in today when you have so much political correctness. Like when I see being statues pulled down because General Lee represented the Southern, the slavery and all this stuff. Well, okay, it's a history. What are you going to do about it? I mean, okay, it happened. Get over it.
My thing is like,
there's not a reason to pull the statue down.
Yeah, my thing is like, yeah, I get if there's a statue that's celebrating a general that did mass genocide or.
Well, he didn't do mass genocide.
Well, I'm just saying as an example, but I don't think this should be torn down. I think like, okay, this should be put in a proper context, a historical
exactly.
context.
One teach the history properly, but reminds us of the past.
Because you don't want to forget what happened.
Okay, fine. If we're going to have a statue of Hitler, or Stalin for that matter, he's actually worse than Hitler. Yeah, nobody talks about him many times.
Because he killed more. He killed more people, right?
My grandpa used to say that Hitler was a nobody. He said, Hitler's nobody. This is like, it's a pupil of Stalin. I mean, the Stalin was a real animal. The Stalin, not only did he have more time to kill more people, okay, let's not even go there. I grew up in the system. I grew up talking to the people that remember the bad times, went through the war, who were on the front in Russia, were the Germans. I talked to Wehrmacht Germans. I knew one SS man who survived the Gulag, extremely rare, who worked for my father.
You said he was an SS man?
He was an SS man when he was young. He joined when he was about 16, 17. You know, the history gets so skewed, and oftentimes when you hear it actually out of the mouth of people who were part of that history, who were actually at the forefront of it, oftentimes you get a slightly different perception of how things really were. We're not told entirely the truth. We're told things that, in a sense, that what they want us to believe now, that suits their political motives. We're always being manipulated as people. And that's why it's so important that you have to educate yourself. And because people most of the time are either lazy to get educated on their own, because the schools not give you okay, they can teach you math, whatever, but when it comes to history and politics, you have to educate yourself. You have to know the history. And what is history? It's today's politics. You know, people just take the news prepackaged like the cereal and believe everything they see on the news. Yes, sometimes a regular family, American family, or any other family in the Western world. I'm not making comments about other parts of the world. It's, you know, they have to worry about paying their bills, taking care of the children if they have any, and stuff like that. So it's a little different story. They may not have time so much to, you know, muddle through the confusion. Okay.
There's other priorities.
Yeah, exactly. So, but in the end, in today's world and the confusion that we have, you do have to educate yourself, because nobody else is going to do it for you.
Yeah, I always believe you need to find the truth out for yourself.
Exactly.
You gotta talk to people, get different opinions.
And you kind of have to read between the lines oftentimes.
Go to credible sources.
You have to become objective. You have to be extremely patient to listen to people instead of coming to quick conclusions. Sometimes it takes time to figure out what's going on in a particular area of politics, history, whatever, to current affairs. That's what people need to do. The problem is that the schools, especially today, the schools are becoming sort of the centers of indoctrination. Not every public school is like that. There's some really good public schools, but there are some public schools in very liberal areas. Obviously, you can discern I'm more of a conservative person. That's because I grew up under the communism, and I know exactly how it works. And so they can't fool me. And most liberals today are the leftists, whatnot. They might be well-meaning, but it's kind of a naive perception of how the world works. Okay? And so, but some of it is really cunning and actually on the side of evil. Communism rejects entirely, it's totally materialistic, rejects the existence of God. God is the government. The government's going to take care of you.
Organization.
But what they don't understand is that when they get the power, it's read 1984.
Oh yeah,
that's what happens.
Yeah,
okay?
one thing I tell people.
And these people that are promoting these ideas, especially young people today, your generation and younger, I call these people useful idiots, because they may be well-meaning, but they're being used without even knowing it. Because once those that are really in power, in charge of this, once they grab the power and are in power, they will dispatch these people. They will get rid of them. And all of a sudden you'll have a wake-up call and say, what did I do? How come I helped this to get into power and establish the system? You've got, I don't know what's the percentage of young people today between 20 and 30 who believe that socialism is something wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm not saying capitalism is. It's not fair capitalism today either, especially the way it's set up.
Yeah, the way that originally, because I was talking to one of my good friends about this, originally capitalism set up for this country was supposed to be for small, medium businesses.
Exactly, but this is now big corporations. I don't get any break. Nobody makes anything easier for me. Mm-hmm. You understand? This is becoming like it's called a it's the big corporations. They get into cahoots with the government. Basically. Oligarchy, and it's like this welfare for the corporations, and everything is in their favor. Mm-hmm. And they become bigger and bigger and bigger, swallow up the small business, and they basically dominate the market. And it's not only through that, but also through usury. Okay, meaning banking. Okay, these compound interests and people living. They entice you with buying things and getting into debt because you can't afford it, because you want these things, and that's just the nature of a man to want things, I suppose. The passions take over.
Yeah.
And so I gotta have this, because it's gonna make me happy. And then once you get that, you're gonna have to do another thing. But you really can't afford it. So this system gives you a perception of, well, yeah, but the money's so easy to get. All I have to do is go to the bank, and if I pay every month, I'm gonna get that loan. And then before you know it, you're in debt up to your ears. And you can't get out of it. And so many people, one of the reasons we had this last debacle, this crisis, is because people couldn't afford the houses that they had. And so it just tanked. Now we had to all bail them out. We had to bail out the banks. Mm-hmm. So this kind of capitalism sucks. Okay, church is an answer for this. It's called distributism. It's a kind of a just system that's not socialist, but it's not a capitalist either. Because you have the right to property. Okay, in the church's teaching, you have right to business, right to make a living. But what is enough? It's like so many people, they just grow. I mean, what's he up to now? The Microsoft guy was like 80 billion. 10 years ago, it was like,
Bill Gates.
Yeah, Bill Gates. 10 years ago, it was like 40 billion. Now he's like 80 billion. It's like, well, when is it enough?
I think he's going the other way because he's retired, but he's been donating his money.
I know. Well, you can donate for that.
But you're thinking about also too, Jeff Bezos, the Amazon guy.
The problem is, however, that oftentimes these big businesses, because they're so big and they have so much power and influence, generally their politics aren't necessarily the best either. So what they influence oftentimes because of being so huge and dominating. It's like George Soros is another example. Mm-hmm. The man collapsed so many currencies and got rich off of it and supports all kinds of upheaval all over the world. All these little revolutions because of his mentality and idea how to restructure the culture. Okay. It's completely twisted and demonic, actually, this man. And everybody thinks, oh, he does such a wonderful work. No, he doesn't. He's outlawed from Russia. He's outlawed from Hungary. Okay. These people don't want him there because, like I said, he's destroyed countries and got rich off of it. Nobody knows the history of this man, who he is and how he got into the money. He got rich manipulating and collapsing currencies. Okay. Yeah. The man is completely evil. His society is open society. Sounds wonderful he promotes, especially a lot of people who are liberal. But that's the problem with some of this stuff, that it just sounds great as an idea. Communism sounds great as an idea. Socialism. Everybody's equal. First of all, there's no such thing as equality. There's always hierarchy in everything.
Yeah. Especially if you're an artist, you're going to have a domain. You have your own domain.
Well, it's not even that. It's like not everybody can be a professor, and somebody's going to have to dig the ditches, unless you have a robot to do it, and somebody has to teach at the universities. Not everybody can be president. Somebody in the army, for example, and somebody's general, somebody is a soldier.
Yeah.
There's a hierarchy in everything. There's no equality in anything. We are equal to each other only in the sense that we're human beings and we have the same basic rights. Okay, to liberty, freedom, and this and that. Other than that, beyond it, there's no equality. So this sense of like equality on what level? Like income? Is that what you know? If you're good at something, you should be awarded for it.
Yeah.
Okay. You cannot pay the same amount of money to somebody who prunes trees and to somebody who does something so incredibly complex and like brain surgery, for example. Yeah, sometimes it goes overboard, but you know what I'm saying? It's just this whole notion of equality. That's just false, and it's been used as a sort of a pretense for bamboozling people into following their ideology.
Well, my thing about the equality thing, because it kind of, how should I put this? There's a time in this country with the whole civil rights era, like, yeah, there were, especially me, because I'm Hispanic, if I was living around that time, I wouldn't be treated like a normal American. And that's when equality, like, okay, equality should become, like, hey, every American needs to be treated the same rights.
I'm going to touch up on that very quickly. We call it racism.
Yeah.
And you know where it comes from? I'll tell you. Secularized Calvinism. Calvinism, as a heresy, back in the early 1500s, you got Martin Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, and all these guys. Calvinism believes of predestination, that God predestined people to be saved. Well, that's nonsense in the Catholic theology, obviously. And so people that were black or of color, they were obviously the ones, because back then it was like they all lived on these primitive villages and on some continent, dark continent, Africa, whatever. Yeah, they were the cursed ones because they never progressed. Okay. So this Calvinism, this country is based on this kind of ideology. The first settlers, well, the first settlers actually were Catholics here, but they got pushed out by these Protestants that came over. Now I'm going to start a religious war here, and somebody's going to really hate me for this, but this is the historical fact and the truth. Okay. So this mentality came into this country. So owning people was not against their basically senses, against their ideas, because these people are not even people. Oh, we can own blacks and put them on the plantation and have them work for us.
Yeah.
Okay, because they're almost less than humans.
Because they're considered beasts.
Yeah, exactly. Now, in a Catholic country like Brazil, for example, where the slavery wasn't abolished until 1889 or something like that, much later than here even, but the slavery was a different character. Now, Catholic Church never endorsed slavery, ever. Okay. In some of these systems and countries, it was tolerated, but the slavery was such that the slave had a right to do his own business in his free time. They didn't have to work for his master all the time. Some of them, in fact, became quite rich and oftentimes bought their own freedom. Slaves had slaves working for them. I'm not saying owning people is a good idea or it's terrible. But there are degrees of what slavery is. Nobody talks about it, and how the slavery actually functioned. In a world of like ancient Rome, it was in fact people put themselves into slavery because they were so poor and impoverished. It was better to be a slave and live in a nice house with a good warm quarters and get 3 square meals a day to work for the master. Or if you had a lot of debt and you put yourself into slavery to pay it off that way. So there were people got mistreated, killed, because, lynched and all this stuff. But actually the slavery became really unbearable, especially in later times, and like America in 19th century. Okay. And it was because of this thinking, okay, where people said, these people are cursed, because they never progressed, so they're destined for hell. This was this Calvinistic mentality. It was actually a Protestant in its origin. And I know that a lot of my Protestant brothers and sisters who believe in Christ as I do will probably curse me for saying this and will totally and absolutely disagree with me. But for example, the massacres of the Indians. Let me give you an example.
The Trail of Tears.
Trail of Tears, and not just Cherokees, but even out west, like the Black Kettles village, when it was completely wiped out and taunted as being an incredible victory for the American army. No, they only murdered women and children because the men were out on a hunt. Okay, and it was in the dead of the winter, and it was led by Chivington, who was a former Protestant preacher. Okay, so that only shows you who killed these people. In Florida, in St. Augustine, when they landed, Ponce de Leon, in 1565, they started missions, and it was what's called the Royal Road. Okay, they started missions from the St. Augustine going up north into Georgia and then going inland. Each mission built a school. Okay, the conversion was done forcefully. Okay, they started building hospitals, taking care of the people, doing school. The English came. Nobody talks about these atrocities. The Protestant English came give you an option to the Indian that converted Catholicism. We either kill you or you convert to be a Protestant. Okay, they burned all the missions out. What the church had built, all these things that they'd done for the people here, okay, for the Indians, who willingly then even converted. Okay, not under derision or at the point of the sword. These missions were burned down and destroyed. Okay, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of people killed by the British, by the Protestants. Okay, so. It was the same out west. Before anybody got there, Lewis and Clark, the Jesuits were already out in Montana and Wyoming, and the same in Canada, evangelizing people and bringing light into the world of the darkness. Okay, because there is a lot of this demonic and shamanistic, we kind of tend to paint the culture of the Indians as, it's wonderful, but I've been on these reservations, and there is a spiritual undertone to it, and it's extremely dark. Yeah, they want to worship the spirit in the sky and stuff. So they have the notion of this one God, but it's not just one God. It's very pantheistic, or they worship the spirits too. And I've been part of the stuff in my younger days that would kind of give you heebie-jeebies as to what they do. Okay. So the church really brought some light into the world. They did very good things, and that is being ignored. And the church is now attacked, especially in light of the abuses, sexual abuses. But what nobody says that these abuses are actually, in fact, almost minuscule in comparison to what goes on in the Protestant communities, Jewish communities, in high schools, karate coaches or whatever, how much abuse there is of the pedophilia and stuff. But nobody talks. Everybody goes after the Catholic Church. Now, I'm not a friend of Pope. He's a Holy Father. I respect the office. I don't like his politics. I don't think he's a good Pope, but he is my Pope. Okay. But the Church gets a lot of bad rap that's not based on any facts or truth or anything like that.
Well, my take on that is because I was raised Catholic.
So what happened to you? Where are you from originally, your family?
Puerto Rican,
Puerto Rico?
but mainly from
totally
New York.
Catholic, man.
Yeah, but I was mainly most of my, I think, third generation from New York, third or fourth.
Right.
No, it's just different viewpoints, and then my mom was overly religious, and it came to a point where I just saw her being hypocritical.
Yeah, well, that happens to anybody in any religion. Look, you cannot judge religion or the church by the way the people behave in it. A lot of the people leave the church because what they see people do and being part of I do find that in any organization. It doesn't even have to be a religious organization. And to judge, you have to know the teaching of the church. The mystical body of the church is one thing. The physical body of the church is another. We're all sinners. So to leave a church just on pretense of this, where you see the hypocrisy, is actually, no, you shouldn't do that. You should actually, to know how beautiful the teaching is. It's based on reason. Okay. You've got centuries and centuries. It's the oldest governing organization in the world. And Christ promised that it would never die until he comes back again. I was a Protestant for 17 years, though I was a baptized Catholic, and couldn't find a fulfillment in my faith until I came back to the church. I would die for this church. I would die for this Pope, even though that I don't like him. Okay? But I'm not a fanatic in the sense that I would go bash somebody's head in because they don't believe the same. Okay? Because it's a tolerant religion, and it's a religion of love. But not many people follow that same precept because they don't know their faith. They say they're Catholic, but they're not in their action, in their life, they're not. And that's what you see, and that's why you say, who wants to be part of this organization? That's how people judge the church, and that's why they leave it. And it's also because the church failed in the last 50 years since the Council, the last Vatican Council too. They failed in teaching the laity, how to be a good Catholic. and to follow Christ's teaching. So that's basically it. That's why we're reaping this becoming complete apostasy. And one of the reasons that we're in shambles and Europe is in shambles because they threw God out the window. Anything goes. They think the freedom is that your liberty is that you can do whatever you want. I mean, look at today's the sexual confusion about sexuality and all this transgender. People want to be called by their proper pronouns, whatever that means.
Yeah, I don't like that.
No, there's only two sexes. I don't care how you look at it.
Yeah, scientific. It's just.
But you tell the truth, you can lose your job. Now, what kind of a nonsense is this?
Yeah, it's like you're going against fact, like this basic science fact, like, hey, there's only two.
You just can't decide to be a man when you're a woman one day. It's just, that's against nature. 2 plus 2 always will be 4. You can think it's 5, but it's not going to be. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. And so today people think that whatever they do is fine. If I think I'm a horse, I'm going to run around like a horse. I saw this woman on the YouTube. Seriously. People that think they're a dog. People that think they can marry animals. And what else is next? Pedophilia, that we can have sex with little children? That's already being in works. I mean, to say, I knew with the gay marriage, I know this is all controversial, oh my gosh. But 2 men can get married. I'm sorry to say, but the sphincter is not a sexual organ. It wasn't made that way in nature. Okay. It's not complementary to each other. I don't want to go into this, but you know what I'm saying to that. And the people that are listening, they know exactly what I'm talking about, even if they don't want to admit it to one another. It's just, those are the realities, okay? And so if you go against that, you're going to create chaos. And liberty is not that whatever you perceive to be, whatever you want to do at this particular moment, that it's some kind, no, you're a slave to your passions. You're a slave. You're not free. You're a slave to whatever you decide that you think is right. Because you stop using your reason and you've been given over to complete insanity. And this is what's going on in this country. It's like insanity is taking over. Because what you see on the news and stuff, it's insane. They talk about it as if it's something normal. You know what I mean? It's crazy.
Well,
I'm not saying, look, I can't tell somebody, look, you can't be a man when you're a woman. But I should be free to tell you. I should be free to voice my opinion instead of being shut down and not have any discussion. The reason we have like some of these shootings and stuff like that is because people are just simply, they don't have an outlet to talk about it. They get frustrated because they're shut down. Because if it's an opposing view and opinion, you can talk about political issues, then I'm going to go kill somebody. You understand? It's all pent up inside. There's no outlet for it. That's part of the problem.
I also think it's more factors to that than just that. It's
of course, there are other
especially psychological factors.
Psychological drugs. A lot of it's drug induced, even legal drugs. And so people are not hooked necessarily on heroin and cocaine or crack or whatever. Just prescription drugs. A lot of the drugs that you think that are supposed to help you actually cause depression, this and that.
Yeah, the side effects.
Yeah, side effects. So that also is a factor, So, this is the reason society has all these problems, because we got rid of God, and we believe in all kinds of nonsense, New Age stuff, witchcraft. Now Satanism is coming into forefront. What is Satanism? It's imitation of the Catholic Church in reverse. Why do they go to Catholic Church and steal the Eucharist, the sacrament, the Jesus in the cookie?
Jesus.
Why? Because it's real. Because Christ is present in that. Body, blood, soul, and divinity. They don't go to Protestant church. Nobody's interested in a Protestant church. There's 30,000 denominations. There's like, 30,000 Holy Spirits? Christ founded only the Catholic Church, and we threw the church out, and when the church goes, so goes the society. There's nothing to unify us, you understand? There's no common credo. St. Thomas Aquinas, the angelic doctor, the doctor of the church, living in 1200s, said that society can only function if they have a common credo. If you don't have a common creed, you cannot function. Because all these opposing forces constantly working against one another. That's why leftism works on that. They constantly work. They have to have crisis. If there is not one, they will create one. Have you ever heard of Saul Alinsky, for example? Okay, well, look into it. Look it up, Saul Alinsky, The Book for Radicals. Constantly creates strife. Obama was his pupil. You create groups, come up with scenarios, crisis, people constantly fighting one another, put them in this box and that box, and so there is always a division, never a unity. Okay, and so they think that by collapsing the Christian order in the West at least, they're going to somehow out of those ashes, they're going to create this humanistic society where God is the human and the government, and never going to work. We need that higher authority. We need God's precepts. God is a creator of all this that we see around us. He created the earth. He created you, your soul. He breathed into your body. We cannot do without Him, because you will mark my words 20 years from now. It's not going to get any better. The society cannot function. When you destroy family, especially, you destroy the state. The state is modeled on the family. The family it's a nucleus, is the building block of a society.
The tribe.
Yeah. And if you start confusing it, if you think that men can be a family and have children, and woman, or multiple, or whatever, no, it's not going to work. So you have all these groups and all this chaos, all these creeds, everybody professes a different creed. You can never get united. That's why Muslims are so vehement about, if you say anything bad about Muhammad, if you live in those countries, you're going to get killed, because they've learned that you have to keep a common creed. Now, I'm saying this is a good example that you're going to kill somebody who wants to convert to Christianity.
Yeah.
But they understood it, and it was the same in medieval Europe. If you're a heretic running around preaching anything than a gospel that the church taught, they were not going to deal with you kindly either, because for the sake of the peace in the society, they had courts and they had inquisitions. Okay, it wasn't as severe as, for example, in Islam. Okay, but they did do that, because they understood very well, if there is no common fact of the society, common creed, I always come to that creed that you profess, then the society cannot exist. And this is what happened. This is what happens to the Western society today, is that it's falling apart on account of this. So we touch up many really, really touchy subjects but we not need to be afraid to talk about them, And in fact, we need to discuss these things. I could be wrong on some of the stuff. I can't cover everything, I did, of course, but that's up for debate. That's why if you're a reasonable person, you will respect. I have many Muslim friends, for example, because I compete in Muslim countries. Yeah. And oftentimes I had discussions like these with them. Okay? But if you respect the other person, and I love many of them, okay? They're great friends of mine. But this is what we need. We need to be able to talk to one another, being unafraid. And what they're trying to do to us today is that be afraid. Do not talk to one another. Keep your mouth shut. Just accept what is given to you from the top. Okay? And so that's wrong. We need to talk about this, and so we can find a common ground, because division is only going to cause disaster. There's no strength in division or in multiculturalism. Look, you can, like in Europe, for example, today, they say immigration is great, and they bring these people from Africa, and that are completely different culture. You bring it into Europe, and a lot of them are not even willing to. I know, because I was an immigrant. I saw it in my own kind. They came to America and they kind of stuck to one another, crying on each other's shoulders, complaining about America. And it's like I told them, what do you expect? Like they're going to welcome you with, hey, you're here, we're going to give you, job that pays $100,000 a year right away or something like that. No, my dad and I left that. We just threw ourselves into the American culture and the society for what it's worth, because we knew that was the only way to basically be part of America. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
And so they bring these like really foreign cultures into Europe. They're based on a completely different way of thinking, a completely different creed. It can never work. This multiculturalism it's not working out.
I mean, the thing is that worked for America, though. We have multiple cultures, multiple religions.
I know, yeah, this melting pot.
And it has
to a certain
worked,
extent it
especially
worked,
in New
but
York.
we're starting to see it actually collapsing a little bit. How many people live off of racism here, for example?
Say that again?
How many people live off of racism here? The so-called people that are against racism are the very ones that profit from it.
Mm-hmm.
Sharpton, Jackson, all these people. They don't want the racism to go by the wayside.
Yeah, they're fearmongers.
Yeah, exactly. And what is this like white privilege stuff? I come from a culture, I never owned a slave. I come to live here, I want to get along with everybody, and I have to be guilty of something because I'm white.
Do.
That's absolutely ridiculous. That's racism also.
And most generations now don't have don't have ancestors that own slaves.
Look, you come from a culture in Puerto Rico, for example, where finally your people were catechized way back when, your ancestors, okay, the Indians, they became Catholics. You profess the same creed. Okay, since this is not about color, you understand. This is about creed. That color has nothing to do with it. And we try to divide by the color. And this is still happening in this country. And you go to Brazil, for example, nobody gives a shit what color you are. People get along just fine. But here I feel like I have to walk on eggshells all the time, you know? Like being afraid what you say in front of who, you know, you don't want to insult the black people. Because you can't talk about it openly. So the color has nothing to do with anything, really. This is such a concept it's a political concept. Yeah, you know, there will always be racists because you look different, you're dark skinned, so you don't look like me because I'm white, you know, whatever. There are those bigots out there. You always find those in every culture. Right? It's like, and it goes the same for the blacks or, you know, anybody. You know, they can be just as racist as the white people. Just because the current injustice that's of 100 years ago was done mainly to them doesn't mean they're not capable of the same. It's a human nature. You know, it's a sinful human nature. It's a fallen human nature. So, there.
So we got way off topic. Well, it's good conversation, but like we
got way off the topic.
Way off topic. So we'll go to a fun question. Huh?
Okay.
We'll go to a fun one. Here's one. If you wake up tomorrow and gain any power or ability, what would it be and why? Basically, if you wake up tomorrow with a superpower.
What would I do with it?
Yeah.
I would try to fix things in the world, I guess. It depends what kind of a superpower it would be, I guess. That would depend very much on that. It would have to be more specific as to...
Well, anyone you want.
Well, if God gave me the ability to convert people and to see things His way, then I would like to go spread the gospel. That's what I would love to do. I would like everybody to know that Christ died for their sins. And that redemptive power of His sacrifice is there for them to take. That's a grace given by God. And that would unite the world and make us all really easy, and we would love each other. Now, that's not going to happen probably in this world. It's going to happen in the next, but if I had that superpower given to me by God, that's what I would do. I mean, flying around like a Superman obviously never fixed anything, you know. I mean, you fix something, but it's like you patch one hole and then another one opens up in the hole of the ship on the other side. So it's like constant, you know. It goes in circles.
Oh, here's a good one. If you could travel in time into the future or the past, which would it be and why?
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good question. I would love to travel perhaps to ancient Rome and to about 50 AD onward, someplace around that time, to see how it was when Christianity took root, okay, and the sort of the nature of the persecution, and that, or to medieval times, and because there's so many things about medieval times that we either idealize or do not understand how things really were. You know what I mean? There's so many things that at so many places. It would be on the steppes of Mongolia. I'd like to be there. I don't know. I cannot answer this straight. I mean, it's just that this
too many interesting times.
There would be too many places that I would like to go. Okay, if I had the time machine, I would just hop around.
Just keep going.
Let's keep
go
going.
Here, go there.
Yeah, today this, today that. I would like to see. I would like to see actually. Yeah, I would like to see how it really was. Okay, do we have the history right?
Yeah.
So let's say I would have a topic. Okay, what happened in this battle? I'd like to go back there and see what actually happened. So, or this particular affair that happened in, I don't know, year whatever. Did it really happen this way? You know what I mean? Something like that. So the time machine, I would have to have a time machine to fly around.
Go back and forth.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. This one's a kind of a serious question. What was the most terrifying moment in your life?
Most terrifying moment in my life. I have to say that I have been very blessed in actually not having one. I've had difficult moments in my life, obviously. Not so much growing up, but especially through the immigration, the very trying times. But I never really despaired. I always kind of thought that, toughen up, take it as it is. It's not always going to be this way. I was only one time maybe danger of life being attacked by somebody, but even that didn't freak me out. I don't know, maybe deep inside I always somehow trusted God that he would pull me out of it. I never had like some kind of a traumatic stress to the point where it would like just be haunting me. So no, I mean, I've seen death, I've seen, difficult things, but a lot of people will never experience, but it never affected me to the point where, I mean, even today, I mean, okay, if I had to die, well, I'd die, okay, fine. I mean, I know what's waiting me on the other side. I know it's not the end, so if I live my life according to the precepts of God, I have nothing to worry about. I have the hope, I don't despair. And sometimes I despair a little bit. Do I have things right? Am I really, I mean, everybody goes, but I don't despair to the point where, like, I would get to that point where I would have like a really terrifying moment.
It's overwhelming.
It's basically overwhelming. I mean, you get scared, you had moments where, well, that was close. Something like that. Yeah, that's how I would answer it. Yeah.
What is your most treasured memory?
My most treasured memory. I hate to say that, but I go back to the religion. People are going to get tired of it and listen to it. I'm coming back to the church. First time seeing the elevation. And if people aren't familiar with the Catholic Church, what does that mean, elevation? It's during the consecration of the bread and wine, when priest lifts the host up, which is the moment when Christ was crucified, because the Mass is representation of the Calvary in an unbloody manner. Okay. So that was the moment of reversion back to the faith, coming back to the church. I think that's like the moment, yeah. So, yeah, that's how I would answer it.
Okay. What's the biggest sacrifice you made in your life?
Biggest sacrifice? Yeah, I made many sacrifices. But I do have to say I've been really blessed also that at least I look at it, no matter what difficulties I ever went through or if I made any sacrifice, I never looked at it as like being the biggest or great. I never thought of it in those terms. Biggest sacrifice. One of the biggest sacrifices was basically leaving my country into the unknown, leaving everything behind, leaving with, coming to America with a suitcase of worn out clothes and not knowing what's going to be tomorrow. So that kind of a sacrifice that you left everything behind, the family got divided. My sister and my mother stayed behind because the whole family couldn't go. They wouldn't let you go to the West, As a whole family, it was impossible. So we knew we were going to get separated. We just didn't know it was going to take 5 years to get reunited. And probably if my dad knew, he would probably never leave. So I guess that was, but I was kind of giddy. I was young, so I was ready to fight and I was ready to overcome anything. You're an idealist, when you're young, you have the courage and the strength. That's why you go into military. I mean, I need that attitude in the military, like you're invincible. Yeah, so that I think that would be that.
Okay. When was the first time you fell in love?
Oh my gosh. I was a little kid. There was this little redhead in a kindergarten.
Little redhead.
In a kindergarten. And her name was Lucinka. Because we have diminutives, for the name. I remember her very vividly till today. All I can see is this red hat. And I was kind of like enchanted with this girl. But then really it wasn't until like my late teens I met this girl she was from America. She was a daughter of immigrants who immigrated in 1968 to America. He was a professor at the University of Austin. I forget of what. I think mathematics, if I'm not mistaken. And this was back in the late 70s. She came for a visit because that was still part of the family in Czech Republic, in Prague. I got to meet her and I fell in love with her. I mean, it was like love at first sight. I was crazy about this girl. And we had, for a couple of summers, she would come back. We had, holding hands and all this like really innocent stuff. There was none of this 13-year-olds having sex nowadays. No, this was really naive.
That was sweet stuff.
Yeah, it was really, it was a different society, even under communism. There was still that perception of, this thinking that we were still innocent, It wasn't unusual for people to fall in love and not necessarily have sex, To be a 20 years old and be a virgin was not that uncommon. So that I was like my 17, 18, I was like something like that. Yeah. So this was the girl. Yeah. What happened to her, I have no idea. If she's still in Austin. Last time I heard, she was actually in Prague, working for an American newspaper there, like for the local the expats that are living in Prague. And I meet a lot of those when I go there because I travel to Czech Republic quite a bit. So it's funny to talk to Americans that live in Czech Republic. I think she was working for that paper. Whether she sold us or not, I don't know. It'd be interesting to meet her. So there.
All right. So this is the last question. I ask this question to everyone. It's a serious question, and it's a two-parter. So, what is the worst thing you have ever done in your life, and what is the best thing you have ever done in your life?
Oh my gosh, the worst thing that I have ever done in my life. Let me think. That's like going to confession to a priest. And except he keeps it to himself. He can't divulge anybody. But this is like public here. What's the worst thing that I have done that I should be ashamed of? It's something that we call this sin. Okay. So there's this one thing that I remember vividly. I had a best friend. He was my best friend when I was a kid. For many, many years. We were best friends until we parted company when I immigrated. And he had this little knife. You know how boys are about
Yeah.
pocket knives, you know, when you're growing up, right? You want to have your
Yeah, you want
pocket
the
knife.
little tool.
Well, he had this, it wasn't a pocket knife, but it was like the handle was made of like cow horn. It was a small blade and it had a cow horn sheath, okay? It was just beautiful craftsmanship. And I coveted this thing that he had. And it got to the point where I was like willing to even forfeit our relationship, this friendship that we had, just for the sake of having that knife. And I stole it from him. And I hid it, you know, and he was so distraught over it, you know, like, oh, you know, it's like, it's my dad's, he gave it to me. And it's like, because I came up with some story, oh, I was playing with it in the grass, someplace fell. You know, I came up with some concoctions. And I felt so bad that, you know, he went home crying, and it's like, so 2 days later, my conscience got better of me. I dug it up and I said, I came up with another lie. I found it, here it is. I never told him I stole it. I never told, till today, I never told him. But I gave it back to him. So they kind of, you know, they kind of like stayed with me. It's kind of like a little bit of guilt, the residual. I confessed it.
But a lesson.
Yeah, I confessed it since. And the best thing? I don't know. What's the best thing I've done in my life? I'm still waiting for that one. That's about the best I can tell you. I'm still waiting for that one. I mean, best thing. You know, you try to do the best, you know, but is it the best thing? That's the question. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's my answer.
All right. I want to thank you for letting me come to your house and do this interview.
Sure thing.
For anyone who wants to come find you on your website so they can buy a couple bows and take a lesson, what website is it?
They can go to salukibow.com. Basically, they'll find out all the information there, the contact information, and information about what I do, the types of bows, the training for the horseback archery, or just ground archery for that matter.
Yeah, and I'll put the website link on the episode description so you guys can find it.
Sure.
I want to thank you again for letting me come here to do the interview.
Yeah.
I want to thank you guys for listening. And don't forget to buy my novel, The Malediction of Blue and Glass. It's available on Amazon as a print or ebook edition. You can go on the podcast website and find a link for it. Thank you guys again for listening. I hope you have a great week.
All right. Hey, we got some